Hi, so I'm going to discuss episode 25 and 26. So the players just got done basically torturing this red tiefling to try to get information on why him and his group attacked them. And they brought the red tiefling, whose name is Oda, to turn him into the barracks police. And that took about 10 minutes or so for them to discuss certain things and try to get more information. Then they wanted to find an inn because the sun had gone down and it was nighttime, and the city was bustling with parties and people all about the streets. I told them that the streets were jam-packed full of people, even busier than during the daytime. So they decided to take an hour and a half or so to go to the three different tavern choices that they had, which was the lowest end, medium, and then the high end. And they ended up going with the high end for the security measures, as they were told that there's an alarm spell cast in front of the door each night, as well as the rooms are soundproof and you can't break in, they're magically locked. So that was fun for me to discuss the different taverns. I think some of the players wanted to just get it over with, whereas some other players really wanted to hear all the options, make sure that they explored a little bit. So I'm having to deal with players wanting for things to move really quickly when other people want to spend more time, as all the players love different aspects of the game, and they're kind of getting fed up with this talking to all these different NPCs and shopping and walking around, and they're wanting to get to more action. Even though they just had a battle, they're like, oh, the plot's moving too slow, we need to play longer. So we increased the time to 3 hours for these last two sessions. And I don't know if necessarily more things got done, but hey, I guess we'll see over time if we like it, or if we want to go back to 2 hours, as well as, if we're only playing for 2 hours and they want to stop and discuss something for 40 minutes, that's basically half the session. So the attitude of the discussion is way worse because they're saying, oh, we're spending all our time doing this when we can be doing something else. Versus when you have a little bit more time, it's like, oh, well, we can kind of relax and be a little slower and methodical with our decision making. So kind of just feeling that out for a longer time. My prepping has also had to increase because of the longer time. I have to be ready for them to go down a path and then explore it a lot further. So I'm having to prep my dialogue, my characters, my plots, if for any decisions they make. So yeah, hasn't been too a big burden or anything like that. So once they got to the Devil's Taste was the name of the inn, and the proprietor wears a mask, and he's a tiefling, and he has one hand, and he wears lung glasses, and he's an older man, and he shows them to their room. And he tells them, because they're trying to make a deal because it's 60 gold pieces to stay there per night for the one room. And even though the room has, 2 beds, some couches, it has a tub that they brought up specifically because it was asked for by Wink, the elf wizard. And so they're trying to get a better deal. So he's like, oh, well, if you can track down the people who chopped off my hand, which happened a long time ago, I can let you stay here for free indefinitely. So they're really interested in doing that. So when they got settled in, they had some discussions amongst one another about, we're a group now, so we can't just go do whatever we want because your piece reflects on the whole and it reflects our name. And I think the discussion was a good discussion, but I think it was coming from a place of metagaming where you as a player know that these characters have been stealing and wrongdoing people, but you as a character do not know. Your character doesn't know that they've been sneaking off these things. You may have been having suspicions and rumors, but the player who brought it up was one that went back to steal from House Papaleo when everyone else didn't go. So I thought it was very ironic that this character was the one that brought it up, but I thought it was a good discussion overall, even though I think it lasted a little too long, and points that were already brought up were then circled back over and over. And one of the players was getting actually frustrated, which doesn't always work when you can't stay in character, because then your feelings boil over. But anyways, then Blasius, Olavax's squire, asked to speak with him privately again. He did ask to speak with him before the combat with the drug addicts. And then Olavax was wanting to go outside, but the rest of the group was like, oh no, you can talk here. It's totally fine. We're a group now. He's like, no, I think we need to discuss this outside. So he took Blasius outside, and the group, and I had something prepared. So I had something written out, and he basically told Olavax, I'm under your tutelage. I am wanting to be a knight. This is my goal. And I have received no training from you. I've received nothing but I'm being neglected, basically. And there's no camaraderie. There's no like learning. It's basically me just following you around and you being rude to me the whole time. So I want to improve and become this thing, and I want to help you in what you're doing. So let's work together. It's more of like a charge. So, hey, I know we're estranged. I know you want Ivan back, but like, let's become friends and like truly bond. So I thought that went really well. The role playing was great. And they went back in and they went to sleep. And in the middle of the night, they heard a knock at the door. And the person who's keeping watch, which was Enzo and Wink, who was just awake because he only sleeps for 4 hours because he's an elf. Enzo answers the door, and it's this hood figure. And she asks if he's Enzo. And it was Luna, who's his girlfriend or a person that he's interested in, that made a pact with him, with her patron, which is like how he became a warlock at the very beginning of our campaign. So she was very upset. She held a knife up to his neck and like pulled him out. And Wink was like, do I need to do anything? And she's like, no, we'll take care of it. So he goes outside with her and they have a discussion. She's asking like, oh, you haven't reached out to me. I've been reaching out to you for months. I thought you were dead. Like I've been having all these dreams, things like that. So, and I think that Enzo just kind of froze up and like didn't know what to say or how to react. He was just like speechless. And he was trying to be like nice, but he didn't really like have any questions. She's like looking in, why are you here? And he didn't tell her. He wanted to be aloof, even though like they're really close. So that was odd to me as a dungeon master, but she was like, she's a reporter. So she's, oh, why can't you tell me, like wanting to ask probing questions without being like super obvious. She's like, oh, you need to get permission from your group in order to tell me information. Like that's very inefficient. Like the group that I work for, like, where I said, I didn't make a very good analogy. I said like, oh, we're wings of a bird and we can go out and do what we want. What I should have said is like, we're a group of 1,000 hands and we don't ask the master what we can do before we do it. We just do it knowing that like the master trusts us. So I thought that was great. I thought I role played her like how I wanted. So she basically left and was pretty upset, and the players were like, oh, she cannot be trusted, even though like their characters didn't know anything. And I thought that was very interesting, because can an NPC not be upset and mad at someone who they're really invested in emotionally, who's basically like brushed them off, and they're having a hard time like coping with like, oh, I love this person and I really care for this person and I want them to be successful, but they're not telling me anything. They're being aloof. They didn't reach out to me. Like I'm not a priority to them as much as I think that they are. So we'll see how that plays out in the campaign moving forward. But that is what's happening with Luna. She's looking into Run Your Rich, which is the casino. She's only been here for a couple weeks, so she doesn't have too much information. She did ask Enzo like, oh, I didn't know they're having a party next week, and the group thought that was odd. But little do they know, this casino is massive and they throw lots of different parties and have their hands in a ton of different things. So it's impossible for one person who's just been investigating them for about like a month to know all the ins and outs, as she's still trying to figure out who's even in charge, what their names are, what their roles are, things like that. So then after she left, they woke up in the morning and they wanted to go get registered with the Magic Guild, because they were told by the guards, if you're caught casting magic and you haven't been registered, you'll be fined and or thrown in prison. So that was my warning to them. If they did break it, it would most likely be a fine. I'm not going to throw them in prison. That is so lame for me to just take their agency away like that if they were to commit a serious offense. And that goes to a point that happens in the next session, so stay tuned for that. After they got registered, they wanted to take the Labelle tours, which is something I hinted at, which is given by the Kenku's, the Kenku house of the city, who does all of the education and information. And so I didn't have anything really prepared for that. I kind of just gave them all the information that I had written down on the city, like, here's the noble houses, here's their roles, here's their sigils, here are some facts about the city and why there's so much magic here. So I think that was enlightening to them. I don't think it was as important as I wanted it to be. I wanted them to learn like crucial information. I did give them some information about like the richer district, Old Labelle, has gates and you have to have entrance passes or permission in order to go in, which is where the party's being held. So they do have some sort of information there. But all in all, I think it was not as informative as I wanted it to be. And I think that's just a lack of my preparation. So after they took the Labelle tours, they wanted to go buy clothes and masks for the masquerade. And if they ever go to the casino, they want to look nice, as they've heard it's a really luxurious place. So they spend time in Gilded Threads and Mystique Mask, which is a store that I made. And the proprietor is an owl folk named Aldrich, and he's very flamboyant in his feathers, and he always like touches people with his feathers and like is very wingy. He's very handsy with the players. So they had a joy of looking at all the different masks. I had cool images of the plays that I shared with them. So that took about 30 to 40 minutes of them shopping. I also wasn't prepared for them to want to know every single magic item that the store had. So I was like, I'll just send it to you after if you're wanting to know every single magic item and potentially wanting to buy something. But every one of them bought something, I believe. So they kind of have all of the gear now. The only store that they really haven't been is the bookstore, which I'm sure that they'll go to eventually. So shopping part, I think, is behind them for now. So that takes us into episode 26, where the players went back to Woe after shopping. The Woe is the proprietor of the Devil's Taste, which is the tavern/inn that they're staying at, and they asked for more information about these guys that chopped off his hand because they're running out of gold. It's been a day already. They need to get free lodging or move to a cheaper place. So they went and they got more information. And during that week, I had time to prep, like, okay, who are the bad guys? How are they linked to the other bad guys? And so the story I made up was Woe was looking for a hidden entrance in Laudania Rich, which he found. He was caught and kicked out, and nothing else happened to him. Then Laudania Rich hired this gang called the Hand of Deceit to basically chop off his hand and as punishment, like a punitive measure. So that is the entire story. So he gave them the names of the people that he knew that cut off his hand, and he told them where they hang out. He told them that they're just a low-level gang, and I had them roll investigation checks to see what the party would learn because they wanted to do more investigating other than talking to Woe. And I said, okay, well, you guys find that the best source of information is just digging in more with Woe. And he tells you that there really isn't any other plots going on. They don't have their hands in other things. They're basically like a gang mercenary guild who cut off his hand. And he wants them dead and proof in order for them to stay there for free. So, and they hang out in a brothel, which is found in Strada Lusuria, which is the lust street. It's like my red light district of the city where there's just people everywhere. Brothel, it's basically a street of brothels and other things, drugs, what have you. And so they headed over there and I described the scene. I told them it was, filled with people. There's people on the balconies up on the side. Picture like in the scene from Hook when like those girls are leaning out, like trying to beckon to people to come in. Very similar to that. You get a big smell of perfume and smells. And the closer you look, the dirtier it becomes. You find the brothel, which is called Palazzo Slugni, which means the Palace of Dreams. And before they go in, they're like, okay, what should we do? What's our plan to going in? And the plan that they decided on was, okay, we're all going to go in, and then Tink is going to stay back, and he's going to go in and cast disguise self on himself as Woe with the missing hand, kind of bait the three bad guys. One was a bugbear, one was a tiefling, and one was a drow elf. I kind of bait them out and see who else is with them, and then you guys can all like attack them. And then I did mention as well that Woe said, beware of charms. It's very common for people to try and charm you in Strada Lusuria to try to get more coin out of you and like get you to come to their pleasure houses for a long period of time. So just be aware of that. And one player, Thadon, who's been very overly cautious, like basically anything I mention is like, oh my gosh, we're going to die. Oh, we're going to the Faerome. Oh my gosh, we're going to die. We can't do anything. We have to be very like cautious and take no risks. And then, we're going to Labelle. Oh my gosh, we have to be very careful and not talk to anybody and not do anything, keep our head down. And that was maybe my fault for not giving them my DM style. Like if you make a mistake or if you act out, like let's say you kill someone in the middle of the street, I'm not going to like punish your character to the point where D&D is no longer fun. Like I want it to be exciting. I want it to be funny. I want this to be an escape from our normal lives. So if you make a decision, it is not going to punish you. If there are clear indicators like, hey, you get a sense that this portal goes to another realm, and then you go touch the portal and you get sucked through, okay, well, that was an indication that would happen if you did that. So I'm not going to just screw you over if you do something wrong or if you miss a clue. I will always give you what you need in order to be successful, as well as like you're the heroes of the story. So it's like this isn't Game of Thrones where anyone can die at a second on a whim. It's more like Lord of the Rings where, they're the heroes. They have special abilities. They are heads and shoulders above the rest as far as scheming, intelligence, everything. They like can see through things quickly, just like Lord of the Rings. There's no like long plot of all of my villains out scheming my players and combat is a drag because all of my enemies know all of the greatest tactics ever and know how to defeat them, because that is not fun to play against. The challenge level difficulty should always go up and down as the difficulty of enemy increases, but they haven't really gotten to that point yet. They've gotten close a few times, but again, not anywhere where I've used advanced tactics on my players, and I don't plan on doing it for quite a while. That's not the game I run. I don't run a very high tactitious game because my players aren't highly tactitious. So I have transformed my game to fit my players, and they need to realize that that is what I'm doing for them. So they are okay to let loose. Just chillax. It's a character. If your character dies, it's totally fine. Whatever, roll a new character. I don't want them playing paranoid, which is what happens next. So the players are going to enter, and then Theron says, oh, let me run and find some underground contacts, and I'll talk to them, and then I'll come right back. However, finding an old contact here for Theron would mean he would have to go find someone he knows, which would take more than 10 to 20 minutes for him to do. Then he would have to get information out of them and hope they don't stab him or do anything else or find any enemies that he's created, because the backstory of Thadon the Bugbear and Tink the Human is they're orphans, and they have made some enemies along the way, which has gotten them all the way to Alloy, which is where the campaign started. So they have previous enemies, basically. So the issue with him breaking away was, number one, he's no longer with the group to interact in the brothel, which would have been fun with a big bugbear and seeing how people would have interacted with him, as well as how he would have interacted with them and the rest of the group in that scenario. And number two, now while he's making investigation checks, I'm having to come up with information on the fly and message him via Zoom while everyone else is doing things, so my attention is now split. I now can't pay attention to the rest of the group because I'm trying to formulate responses to send to this one player. So I maybe could have just paused and said, hey, this is what you learn. But the other issue I was having was, like, in his mind, it would only take 10 minutes, where in my mind, it was not as quick as he thinks it is because of all of the other things that we've already laid out with this backstory. Made enemies everywhere, doesn't have a ton of contacts in places. He was a very low level thug bugbear in the beginning. So now he's kind of turned a corner with a better group and things like that. So as well as, like, the dynamic of the party has always been, like, Olabax and Thadon do not get along. They've always been butting heads, and they're starting to, like, just barely starting to, like, get to like each other. But then, people run off and do their own thing. So I would prefer, if the group is going to split, that 2 or 3 of them go with them. That way there's 2 groups, and I can say, okay, this is what this group is doing. Let's pause and go back to this other group. And then I can just go back and forth like this until they meet back up with one another. But when it's just one person, it's then like, okay, these 2 people take up 30 minutes and then the rest of the group takes 30 minutes. So the amount of screen time you get as a player is very diminished. And it's not fun to just sit and listen to someone else play for 30 minutes to an hour, even if it would have only taken 15 minutes. Again, you're a group now. You should try to stick together where possible. So they enter the brothel and they get drinks, and it's packed in here. I had a map that I planned. It took forever to find all these different tokens for all these different races and come up with names and backstories for all of them. Just in case the players wanted to talk to them, I had some, like, pre-planned things to say and information to give. They got drinks, and then they went into the corner, and I had some of the workers come up and try to charm them, to which only Enzo failed. Pretty much everyone else I tried to charm resisted. So Enzo was playing the bachelor, and he had transformed himself to look like an old man. However, when you're dancing up on someone and you touch their cheek with your hand, the illusion is broken now. So now this person knows that you're not a fake, like you're not an older elf, you're just like, you're you. However, I told them, like, that the dancer doesn't pay any mind because this is not the first time they have come upon this. This happens all the time where people go into the brothel looking like someone else, disguised because they have an image to appear, and they don't pay any mind. They obviously remember, like, oh, like, I've slept with this nobleman, or this nobleman comes here and there. Like, that information is passed around, but it isn't a big shocker to them. So what ends up happening is Tink then enters. After that's all happening, they're all hanging out, having a good time. And then Tink walks in and sits down, and one of the tiefling stands up, and he walks over to him and he asks him if he remembers who he is. And the reason why I had him ask him if he knows who he is was because he wasn't sure if this was actually Woe or not. But based on Woe's response, I rolled in the back to see if he would be deceived or not. And he then made a signal to call his other person, like, oh, you shouldn't have come back here. Like, we already took one hand of yours. We're now going to take the other. And then that's when combat started. And then Theron wanted to be back in the fray, like exactly at that moment. I didn't want to tell him you're out of the fight, which is what should have happened. But I just told him, oh, you'll just come in the second round. So battle ensued. The rest of the group started walking over from the top right of the brothel, whereas all the bad guys were on the southern part of the map. So what happened? The battle ensued. It was, I think, an easier fight for them, but the highlights were they had the drow girl, her sword floated next to her and she could make attacks that way. The tiefling was a spellcaster. He was an illusionist specialist, so he cast a spell that basically anyone within a 30-foot area, all of the faces they saw were all enemies that he saw were all the same faces. So like they couldn't determine friend or foe, as well as like they got the feeling like they were dizzy. So like the world had been spun like in Hunger Games, and then the world was stopped and they had to kind of reorient themselves. So it was hard for them not to metagame because it's like, you know where you are on the map, but to you, the map is like not the same. Like things are in different places that they shouldn't be in people's faces. Like just because someone is next to you, like you don't know if that's your friend or foe. So they all just held their actions and tried to do things. Then Theron entered and wanted to wait and hide to see if like anyone would come out the entrance. Then the big bugbear came out from his room that he was in with his stripper girls, and Wink cast hold person on him, and it landed, and it stayed there for 3 rounds. So he was basically out of the fight. I think he was only got to attack once, so that was very clutch. I think the battle would have been much harder because he was rolling 3d10 damage, so he could potentially 2-shot someone. Then the web was cast on Enzo and Waldo summoned a bear and then became a bear at the same time, so that was really cool. They ended up killing the drow person first, and then after that they killed Bugbear, and the only person that was left, there were some other people that came and helped, but they weren't really. There was one lady that was firing at Waldo because as the patrons see it, like these people just started attacking for no reason. They don't know what's going on, and then something turns into a giant bear or is like casting spells at their protector, the people that do security for this place, even though the people who do security are bad people. Like they don't know why they're being attacked. That wasn't explained. So they have one security lady they have 2 security people. One person that works in the back kitchens that comes in and out every once in a while, the 3 gang members, and then the one red tiefling chick who guards the chambers who can cast low-level magic. So they ended up killing 3 innocents, including the red tiefling girl, because they thought that she was just a bad person because she kept casting cantrips at Waldo. So he just assumed she was a bad person, even though she wasn't. So he did kill an innocent there. And then they killed the tiefling last. And then Theron only attacked in the last couple rounds because he was trying to disguise himself where no one else could see that he was disguised. So when he entered completely, he looked like a completely different person. So after the battle ended, he started like immediately going to like chop off the hands as proof. And that's where we ended the session. So after the session ended, we did have some discussions as far as like how we can be better players. I think that the discussion was done all wrong. It was very aggressive. It wasn't constructive. It was very berating to one of the players. And I just think that that is not the way that someone should be treated. If you don't like the way that someone is playing the game, then you need to be more civil about it and say, okay, this is how we are playing the game. We would like you to play differently because it is not fun for us when you play this way. Would it be not fun for you if you played it, or if you tried it our way and kind of go at it from that approach? So yeah, we'll see what happened when the players return to WoW. I am planning on just having him tell them like, oh, this is why, like maybe telling his story about what he was doing months prior, and not because WoW doesn't know why these people attacked him. So gonna lay that seed to see if they can find it when they go in Loud and Rich. I do have plans if they do go down the secret chamber, as far as like what they would find. So I'm really excited. I'm not going to reveal that here because I think I'll reveal it in a separate video as far as like the lore behind Ladanya Rich and what's hidden underneath. But it is very exciting. We're getting closer to playing in person, which is going to happen in 2 weeks. So we'll see if they get to the masquerade. I don't think so, but I think just playing in person will be fun either way. So I don't think that there's any pressure for the players to want to get to the masquerade that quickly. If we get there, cool. Like I've said before, if not, whatever. I think just playing in person will be a lot more fun. We'll be able to jive off each other and kind of read the room better, because I think a lot of players, when we play via Zoom, they don't. As well as other things I'm missing is like I'm describing things, but sometimes people interrupt because they have questions, and then I'll like chime in after, like with certain But how Zoom works is if someone's talking, it cuts everyone else off. And a lot of the times I'm mentioning things that get cut off, but I don't know in the moment that I'm being cut off. I think that people are hearing me. So then when I listen back, I'm like, oh, they didn't hear me describe that thing, or like they're asking, for example, what options they have, like what leads do they have? And I was listing off some of the leads and they're like, oh yeah, that lead. But I was listing a bunch of leads that I don't think I've mentioned in a while. So I'm going to have to do better with like saying, hey, did everyone catch what I said? Or maybe repeating myself a little bit more, just because the limitations of Zoom. So I'm excited when we play in person to not have that limitations and see how much more enjoyable that is. So stay tuned for session 27 and 28 potentially to see what happens moving forward. I'm assuming they're going to go to La Dana Rich Casino, as well as try to get some information on the masquerade, talk to the Lady of Masks again, and we'll kind of get a report and get the tickets and try to get some more information on what's going on. So the plot thickens as they get closer and closer to the masquerade. We'll see you in the next video. I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Bye-bye.